Welcome to Gray Overload. And one thing I was thinking about this weekend was is hardware, like GPU hardware, holding back games? And the reason why I was thinking about this is over the last, couple weeks here, week-ish especially, right? We had the 50, 60, 8 gig out, and then we have the 9060 XT 8 and 16 gig, and then a couple weeks ago we had the 5060 Ti 16 and 8 gig as well. So you have all these same GPU names, and they're going to confuse the user, right? Or have good reviews, or trick the user to be able to go through and say, you know what, this has a 5060 Ti, and AIBs can then get those, and boutiques can sell them, SIs can sell them, and hopefully try to make some money and not give the user the best experience they have. And I blame this not just on all these SIs and stuff that want the 8 gigs that are saying, hey, this is a card that is going to be there. I also blame the card manufacturers, AMD and Nvidia, as they keep making them, and we get into the cycle where now they're going to say, and just like AMD did say last week, that the 8 gig cards are still sell a lot, and that's all people need. People is still a lot of people are still using those cards in 8 gigs. And while you could say that that is perfectly true, but is it because you decided that you weren't going to supply and put that to 10 gigs and 12 gigs, right? Eventually, you have to put pressure on innovation, and maybe that's where it takes maybe a game developer to say, you know what, we're going to build a game that is just going to push the limits. We're going to have a low end spec that maybe works on 8 gigs, but we're going to make it so it's going to crush these cards out. And you have high end cards today that maybe won't be capable of running on the highest settings. That's, I think, fine. Remember Crisis? Even Nvidia went through and said these can run Crisis, right? Nvidia's still making that joke because that game at the time was a very intense game, required a lot of performance that wasn't on the market yet. So then people always kept saying, is it able to run Crisis? And that went on for a while. Nvidia, still to this day, will comment, it can run Crisis. Why? Because nothing else has came along that was a game that a lot of people were into and paid attention to, and reviewers really hooked onto it and really showed it off and showed this is, it's finally capable of playing it. And we don't have that game today. And maybe that's what we need. Maybe we need a game that goes and pushes the limits. I've heard some things with Unreal 5 engine of what it's capable of doing and stuff, and maybe you just need to push the limits with this and just see what it's capable of. And maybe a game developer, I like to see a AAA game title be able to do this. I doubt it would ever even come out of Microsoft now, which is unfortunate because there's a lot of IP they have, right? They want it to run on their consoles, especially the S console that is long in the tooth performance-wise. So since they want that to run on there, and I doubt it would come out of Microsoft, but maybe somebody else can put something up, put a game out there that just pushes the limits to really show where hardware is. You've gone, and if you haven't, I highly recommend go check out some of Gamers Nexus videos. He did one kind of showing the performance of where these 50, 60 class cards are, even 70 class cards over the time, depending upon the relative performance to each other, prices, and all this stuff. He went through a lot of the data, and so go check out his video. No use me regurgitating it here when you could see that from him. And one interesting thing of my takeaways is that, as these cards are getting more performant, we're having, $2,000 5090s. The lower end ones are still not getting that huge jump, and you're able to maybe go spend a little bit less on a used card from a generation or two ago and get the same performance, maybe a little bit better in, a in a different class. Well, it could be 70 class if you're a couple generations old or not. And that's still, me personally, I like to see at least the last generations like 70 move down to 60, right? I like to see that full slide down. Um, TIs are just a benefit. And I'm surprised Nvidia still does TIs and then adds in supers with all their naming. I'm surprised they haven't streamlined that. But when you look at this and you see what they're talking about and saying most gamers, you could look at the Steam statistics there and see where they're at, and a lot of people are still playing on 8 gigs of RAM. Well, is that just because, is that because that's what they're choosing, or is that what you're giving them, right? How much is it more for an extra? I'm sure AMD could still put in for 299 or whatever that 10 gigs of RAM and still have a good profit margin on a 9060 instead of, I'm going to call it the 9060. Here I am going through my head, do I really want to say 9060 XT 8 gigabyte? No, I do not want to do it. They should have a 10 gig base model here and go from there. Is it really that much of a difference, right? The extra 2 gigs, maybe you can get some 1440p. Remember, AMD has gone through, and really everybody has at one point. Maybe Nvidia has been the most consistent of saying, just just don't care what anybody says and just giving it what's out there. But AMD has gone and touted 1440p, and then all of a sudden the 8 gig card, that's your 1080p card. So AMD has gone from wanting to push the gaming industry of why you need to upgrade to kind of satisfying with, you know what, you have an 8 gig card already, so just upgrade to another 8 gig card because that makes sense. If you have an 8 gig card, why would I want to upgrade to an 8 gig card, right? You're just enabling it so that maybe somebody coming into it would just go with that card rather than spend the extra $50. Make that the 9060, make it 10 gigs. You'd have a much better reception, and people would see that you're trying to actually have some innovation in the industry and give more to the user and uh, actually invest in your customers a little bit, right? I think that there's a two-way street, right? The customer buys your product, and that's them investing in you, saying that you have a product that I'm willing to buy. And then as the company, you want to actually invest in your consumers. And how you do that is maybe through good drivers, not crashing and everything else, but also giving a product for value and putting value into that product. So that 10 gig, 12 gig VRAM on that card instead of 8 gigs, because you want them to be able to have that card for a little bit, enjoy that card, get a usefulness out of that card, and then have them talk about how good that card is, because they in return are maybe telling a friend or two or somebody else posting online of how well that card performed for them with that little bit of extra RAM and everything else, because now they were able to run their games for a little bit longer, a few more years, not have to turn down the settings, not have to tinker with things as much, and they were able to get a good gaming experience out of it. Then you go through and all of a sudden, that return to you is that you get a whole bunch more people that are now looking at that because of that good experience. Instead, the esports gamer that's all they do is play esports, and then all of a sudden that esports gamer decides, you know what, I'm going to try a different game today. I want to try something not esports gaming. I want to try something that maybe will run over that frame buffer. I'm going to have a bad experience with that. But remember, 8 gigs is all I need according to AMD and Nvidia. That's what they're, especially Frank Exor coming out with that a little hot take. Don't engage with stuff like that, right? Make sure your consistency, and it should have been a 9060, not the 9060 XT. That was your mistake. Own up to it and say we made a mistake. And we're not putting the best foot forward out there for our gamers, for our customers, to make sure that they're experiencing that. Because that esports gamer that's been playing esports, that has been using 6.5, 7 gigs or whatever it was on their VRAM, now wants to play that other game, wants to maybe turn up a couple settings on this because, maybe it's a game that you can turn up some settings and there should be some performance because he looked it up, and this happened to be the review was with the 16 gig model and it looked really good, and all of a sudden running into VRAM errors all over again, just because he wanted to try a different game. He or she, could be anybody, right? Wanted to try a different game, and guess what? Now you have issues. And this is where AMD and Nvidia, I, I think from this standpoint of where I've been thinking about this, are holding back games. Is because I can look at what's out there, and because I make the cheapest ones at 8 gigs, most of the cards out there, most people play on 8 gigs. So that's a good market to service. We got to keep servicing that market. Instead of looking at themselves and seeing this is an opportunity, we can move that market to 10 gigs. We can start there and give an extra value on top of what maybe our competitors have. And while we're seeing some limits already being reached in the 8 gigs, and we know esports gamers for the most part don't need this, but what if they do? What if all of a sudden some of these esports games get up there and all of a sudden are 8 gigs, take 9 gigs or something, or they turn on another game, like I said, like in that example. We want them to have a good experience. So they're coming back and saying that they had a good experience in our card, and it's not that they bought a brand new card and are already having issues with it because of our greed and our short-sightedness when we could have actually given the consumer something that they were looking for. It's one of the disappointments I had with this generation because, well, the naming the naming part of these was a problem. I'm okay if you have an 8 gig model here as a low-end entry model. Again, that price should have been for the 90 should here, if I'm calling it, should have been a 90, probably 50. I said 9062, but one of those, 9050, 9060, 8 gig. Then the 9060 XT, 16. You could have kept it the same specs as everything with the 9060 if you were calling it the 90 or the 9060 XT, calling it the 9060 for all I care. I would have been fine with it. Just had the differentiator of the RAM. Fine. You had the differentiation. People would have known the difference, would have been able to see the difference, and you would have had that clear naming scheme difference. With Nvidia, the 5060 Ti should have been just 16 gigs, the 5060 if you wanted 8, and then make the 5060 a 5050 and done that. But that would have been more in line or closer to trying to bump everything up to where it should be because, I don't know, Nvidia, right? This is where this is where we would have liked that third player to really be somebody that introduces something to the market, and maybe Intel will get there, right? I hope that they get there. I think I've been clear about that, that if Intel were to get there, right, they have a 10 and a 12 gig card in the B570 and the B580, and those, if they are able to get there, and I think they're starting to come back, or they were back down to MSRP. I looked like a couple days ago, and I don't know if they still are. But you put something there in that range, who knows? Now you all of a sudden have Intel, maybe that they can get rolling and sell some cars, especially in the low end, and all of a sudden those 8 gig cards look pretty bad against something that Intel's putting out that, by the way, if Intel gets off its legs, the only two companies to blame, and the only people AMD and Nvidia can blame, is themselves. They had the opportunity to really kind of squash what Intel was doing. They decided not to. That was their choice, which I'm fine with. If you want to not put your consumers first and put them out there, that's fine. But that I'm glad that Intel decided to put their foot in the door and at least try to dabble in some competition then. So we'll see how this all rolls out here, and I hope that a game is able to push these cards to the max and make it so the GPUs cry a little bit, because I think if we're able to get there, maybe they'll start saying, oh, we actually got to put some effort into this. Maybe it's not, I'm focused more on the low end here in this one, because some of the high end stuff, right, some of those are just, it is what it is, right? We designed the maximum die for this process node. This is what we're getting, and here it is. But I think if you pushed a game to kind of wipe the floor with all the current high-end hardware, and then also you make the low-end stuff really start to look really bad, and that might say spell bad stuff for Nvidia and AMD, looking at it, be like, you know what? We really should have done a better job here, and we didn't. And games that decide to go come out and push things, our low end's not capable, even with a DLSS, even with an FSR. We need to put and make sure that we're giving, the VRAM it needs and the performance it needs on these low end cars to make sure that if something were to happen like this again, we aren't in the same boat trying to catch up and make sure we're having the hardware that we need when our competitor Intel, they may not be the fastest in the world, but at least they had the RAM that was required at the launch of the game. And I think that might be the one where, wait, we don't, Nvidia's and AMD looking at you, wait, we screwed up and Intel got it? Oh my goodness, this is not what we wanted. Maybe that's it. But let me know your thoughts on this below. This is just one of those things I was thinking about and wanting to get it out there because maybe there's some other thoughts. Maybe it starts a discussion, and maybe one day we can hope that Nvidia and AMD focus on their consumers and want the best for them as well, and invest in them as we have spent money buying their products and investing in them for many years. With that, thank you so much for watching Grow Love and help this channel grow. I really do appreciate it. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit that bell icon, watch another one of my videos. It really does help with the channel. Until next time, God bless.